25-30, 35-40, 45-50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going running all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious. Yep. How about that?
A star is born tonight in College Station. The Aggies ride the read option to victory over the LSU Tigers in a full come-from-behind effort. We talk the undefeated Texas A&M Aggies in conference play, going places that they've never been before, what this means for the rest of their season and their playoff chances. Alabama waxes Missouri. They stay alive in the college football race. A lot happened in the SEC. Plus, we talk about scares for Ohio State and Penn State, and overall try and reset some playoff scenarios. All that and more on a truly we'll do it live version of the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes with Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney. I'm Mitch Mason. Fellas, it is no secret where we went to school. This is not a Texas A&M podcast, but hot dang, man, it feels really, really good to be an Aggie tonight after all of the trash talk that came from LSU, their players. This feels really good, and it's a complete 180 that we're going to talk about. There's a ton to get into, but take it away, fellas. How are we feeling?
Guys, the second recap show that we ever did followed up a loss to Appalachian State 2 years ago.
That's right.
And I hate to bring that up, but boy, does this feel good. And I'm sorry if you don't like Aggie homerism, you're in the wrong place tonight, baby. Like this is just, it just feels amazing. The vibes are immaculate. I can't wait to just kind of get out around town here in just a little bit. I'm sure it's nuts, a little bit south of me back towards campus. And man, I'm just at a loss for words. I've never seen in a positive way a game turn on its head like that for Texas A&M. And it feels great. 5-0 in the SEC, 7-1 overall. The whole world is right in front of you right now. And it just feels great. Great way to end October.
And the big thing I want to point out with this one, obviously we'll break it down the game itself, but a lot of this, and I'm going to give massive credit where it is due, a lot of this is due to Kyle Field. And that's something that a lot of people have talked about, and it's been up and down, and how did this game affect it? This game was not just hey, Marcel Reed showed up and caught lightning in a bottle. That did happen. But what also happened is when the pressure got up, Kyle Field made noise. LSU couldn't handle the pressure. 3 picks. It was a disaster for LSU in that second half. Just an absolute disaster. And that is not because LSU is not a good football team, and that's not because LSU forgot how to play football. It's because Kyle Field finally brought the pressure, and it spiraled. That's just what happened. And so massive shout-out to the fans, massive shout-out to Kyle Field. Shout-out for doing the blackout. I had my black on in solidarity as well. Couldn't be there, but, I was excited for that. So, man, this one's for the fans. This one's for that team. Great win. Fantastic. And now the Aggies are in sole possession of first place in the SEC. And man, that showdown with Texas at the end of the season looks like it might be for just about all the marbles.
Well, without a doubt, the story of this game is the flip in momentum that happens. And we'll start this recap middle of the third quarter. Texas A&M has a chance to come out of the half and get some points. They're down 17-7. They go not 3 and out. They have 5 plays. Not a great start to the third quarter. It felt dead. It felt like, oh my gosh, this is another time where offensively, at least, the moment is too big. We, in our group text, we'd spent the entire first half questioning the offensive scheme, questioning Connor Wegman, who at times just looked incredibly lost, and whether that was due to the coverage or the blitz in his face. A lot of times it was just 4 rushers coming. Things were not gelling for the A&M offense. They were able to run the ball, but how many times can you run counter or inside zone without throwing the ball down the field effectively, right? Garrett Nussmeier throws an interception to BJ Mays, and it was truly the first mistake that he had made all game, rolling to his weak side, to his left, threw the ball back across his body. and he throws an interception to A&M's slot corner, who sets them up with a red zone possession. Marcel Reed then trots out at quarterback, and it takes one play, 8 yards on a read option, and it was off and running. It was like it was a different ball game at that point. So, Trey, start with you and talk about Marcel Reed, talk about Colin Klein. What stood out to you once that quarterback change was made?
Once the change was made, it was like LSU had to play a completely different team. It was a completely different offensive scheme playing to Marcel Reed's strengths. And hats off to the LSU defensive staff and that whole side of the ball for LSU, because they had Connor Wigman schemed perfectly. Everybody's going to point to Connor Wigman. Did he look a little timid at times? Yeah, absolutely he did. Did it look like he could have pulled the ball and ran a few times with some wide open spaces? Sure did. Don't know if that's a coaching thing. Don't know if that's a lack of just instinct to go. Not sure what that is. I'm not going to speculate on that. But LSU had him schemed perfectly. They were getting pressure with 4 guys, like you mentioned. And when you can do that, you can drop 7 back into a zone. And you're doing that against typically 4, maximum 5 guys out there running a route. It's a numbers game at that point. They have talented athletes that can play a disciplined zone. And they took away everything the Aggies wanted to do when Connor Wigman was in. There was no adjustment from A&M while Connor Wigman was in either. We kept asking in our group text, where's the stuff over the middle? Where's the quick hitters? It looked like they were trying to get that going in the second half, but even then, Connor Wigman hit a couple guys in the hands and drops. If it wasn't one thing, it was another while he was in. But then Reed comes in, and it's just an absolute spark. And it's not the same after that. LSU looked like a team that didn't get to prepare for that type of offense all week. It's kind of the inverse of what we saw when A&M played Missouri, right?
Yep.
We saw Missouri prepare for Marcel Reed all week long, and then when Connor Wigman trots out there, they have no idea what to do against a guy that can chuck the ball downfield a little bit more. So kind of the inverse. There's only so much time you can spend preparing. You don't have time to prepare for 2 quarterbacks fully over the week, course of a week of practice. But man, it was the right adjustment at the right time. Kudos to Mike Elko and Colin Klein and company for making the call, sticking with it, and just having the guts to do it, because it doesn't always work when you make that change. We saw it last week in Austin. Sark tries to give a spark with Arch. Arch turns it over as well. You get the meme with the 2 of them shell-shocked on the sidelines. But in this instance, it does work because schematically, it's just an almost completely different offense. It feels like Colin Klein is right at home calling plays for Marcel Reed, and he might not know what to do as well with a guy like Connor Wigman, his skill set.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think what was so fascinating was you go back and look at the box score. Marcel Reed threw 2 passes once he came in, a short one, and then he threw a long one right down the seam.
18 run plays, 2 passes while he was in, if you don't count the kneel downs.
I mean, that is unreal given how effective it was. But you're right, Trey. I mean, we've seen, especially in the SEC, we've seen this not work, right? South Carolina, because of injuries, had to go to Robbie Ashford. No spark to the offense. Oklahoma, whatever the heck they're doing with their quarterback situation.
That one definitely didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, you go outside the conference, you go to the Big Ten, Michigan's quarterback trifecta. It's the same song, different verse, but it worked for Texas A&M. And we saw Marcel Reed lead the Aggies to, what was it, a 3-0 record while Connor Wigman was nursing that shoulder injury, right? He came in and he got it done. Was it always pretty? No, absolutely not. But Trey, you even sent a text when he hit that deep throw to Noah Thomas. It was like, oh my gosh, Marcel Reed finally connected on a deep pass. And I think that one attempt down the field kept the safeties back. It made the corners have to stay engaged, and it prevented LSU from entirely selling out to the run, because at that point, for a little bit, they're obviously trying to hold off the Aggies, and then the switch flips, and suddenly they're down. And then they really can't just commit to the run, because the second they do that, A&M throws it over the top. Boom, it's gone for 7. But Marcel Reed comes in after that interception from BJ Mays. He goes 5 for 5 on scoring drives for the Aggies. I mean, truly a night and day difference.
200 yards on 22 plays for him when he was running the offense before they kneeled down. And go ahead. So I'll just throw in real quick, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Mitch, but the 200 yards on 22 plays before that, just 176 yards for Texas A&M when Connor Wigman was in. And like I said, it just completely changed what LSU had to do on defense. It played against their strengths, and you can't scheme against what Marcel Reed was doing in that read option game. That second touchdown I think that he had where it looked like a fumble because of how long he kept it in Amari Daniels' gut and then pulled it out the last second. Just a magician with what he was doing with the football.
It truly was Ace's or Joker's wild for Marcel Reed. I mean, he came in and the confusion was evident on the LSU players' faces, on the coaches' faces. They did not know how to react to a true mystery box that Mike Elko rolled out there. The other thing I was going to say was how much of a lift to the A&M defense was that competent offensive play, right? You get the spark on one side of the ball and it ignites the other side. I was so concerned that, yes, A&M's defense was making some mistakes, but we were about to watch what's happened to teams like South Carolina and Oklahoma, where they have really good defenses. And in a vacuum, that unit might even be the best unit on the field. But you roll it out there in combination with an offense that is anemic, that can't sustain drives, that is constantly putting their counterpart back on the football field, and eventually they run out of gas. And you could see that in the A&M pass rushers, right? They didn't get a sack on Garrett Nussmeier until the fourth quarter. They kept getting close over and over and over again, but because LSU was running that short passing game, because they could run the RPOs, they could get it out to the flats, or quick hitters over the middle like that Anderson touchdown that went for 76 yards or whatever it was. A&M pass rush couldn't quite get home. And I was so scared that A&M was about to waste another really solid performance. I mean, guys, they gave up 24 yards rushing total in this game. Caden Durham, who was an X factor and who's been a home run hitter for the Tigers these last couple of weeks, he couldn't do anything in this game. You had him stuffed at the line of scrimmage, but for a little bit, it looked like it wasn't going to matter because of what that LSU passing game was going to do. I feel great for those 11 guys and, obviously all the rotational guys as well, but they did so much better, I feel like, as a team, as a unit, than what I thought the final result was going to lead to. And they still give up 1 billion yards passing. I mean, Garrett Nussmeier throws for, I think, 405 in a losing effort, 2 touchdowns, but the 3 interceptions. And we can transition to that. Garrett, I'll feed you the rock here. The adjustments made by Mike Elko in this defense at second half took a unit in the LSU offense that was entirely in control, that got whatever they wanted, and suddenly stymied them on just about every single drive. I think LSU scored 1 touchdown in the second half? That's it. They scored once.
Yeah, and you have to give him massive credit, because obviously you talked about how Reed coming in kind of provided that spark, but I think it was just a whole, kind of like what I said, it kind of spiraled at Kyle Field, right? The crowd kind of got back into it, and people are, getting excited again. That gives them a little bit more juice when the defense is out there. And when you're a defense and you got your home crowd coming out behind you like that, you're going to play with that extra step, right? And when you keep getting thrown back on the field after a short drive from your offense, that gets demoralizing. And you start to feel like you have to scramble. And if you're on the back end and a guy's in space, you got to go, blow it up, make a big play. And that's where you make mistakes. And for a long time during that game in that first half, Nussmeier was getting pressured and he was just stepping up in the pocket, finding the guy over the middle. There were, coverage lapses or miscommunications or, all sorts of different things going wrong for A&M. And Nussmeier just took advantage of it for a long time in that first half. But the problem was when that crowd got back into it and they started just playing their football again, that's where things really started to fall apart. You saw Nussmeier scrambling a lot in that second half because he was having to actually get outside of the pocket and try to extend a play and make something happen because they were staying more sound and because the coverage was holding up on the backside. And, in a couple of those places, BJ Mays with a freaking game, right? 2 picks. The first one, he kind of baits him into it. Second one, it just kind of is an underthrown ball a little bit late towards the sideline. And he's able to undercut the route and go with it. And then, even just to get, more into the fact that I think what happened is Nuss got in his head. He did not see Torian York on that 3rd interception. That was just supposed to be a little leak out to the running back. Torian York picks it immediately, sees what's happening, floats out towards that running back, stays low, and then just gets in front of it to make the play. Garrett Nussmeier got in his head. At the end of I don't think you can convince me otherwise. He felt the pressure. He felt that people were starting to come at him. I know he was a little bit hobbled towards the end of that half. That might have had something to do with it, right? Maybe not wanting to step up into the pocket with a little bit of an injured ankle, but end of the day, defense got after it. And as much as Marcel Reed provided that spark, you still ended up winning this game going 31-6 in the second half. I don't know if I'm more impressed with the fact that A&M's offense scored 31 in the second half or that the defense gave up 6 to I still think, really good LSU offense that, I mean, was still moving the ball, just couldn't string drives together because that defense finally came to play.
Well, and so much of that, I think, was credit to the adjustments that Jay Bateman and Mike Elko made defensively in the second half. I told you guys the defense looked very bland, very cookie cutter in that first half. Yes, A&M would bring blitzes, but it didn't look creative. It looked like everyone had their lane and they stayed in that. It was all very right in front of the Aggies. In the second half, you started to see the stunts. You started to see the blindside blitzes. And that, I think, really contributed to Nussmeier suddenly not feeling like he was in control. You went from a guy who was stepping into throws and very, very confidently delivering the ball downfield to suddenly he's having to take an extra second to make sure what he's seeing is actually correct. And that was the difference. You hesitate for half a second with A&M's pass rush, just like Connor Wegman was doing against LSU's pass rush, and the play's over. Suddenly that window's closed, the blitzer gets there, and the play is over. I just think that so much of that is going to go maybe untalked about because the story is going to be Marcel Reed, and as he should be. He's probably going to be on our thumbnail for the podcast and the YouTube videos. I mean, he deserves that. But this A&M defense impressed the heck out of me. I do want to turn it over to LSU's side. Nussmeier throws 3 interceptions. Garrett, you talked about Kyle Field. He obviously has the infamous clip from June where he says that Kyle Field's not that loud. He kind of backed off of that this week in media availability, said, no, it's a good place to play. But what an effort I thought in that first half for LSU to try and take the crowd out of it. The wide receivers, when they're healthy, boy, Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, Austin Anderson, they look dynamic. LSU's not out of the playoff race. They suffer their first conference loss, their second loss overall. Trey, for LSU, what do you see from them that, one, I think gives you hope that they can still make the playoff, and 2, that they need to clean up if they want to play in the postseason?
It's kind of both sides of a double-edged sword for me because they're awesome at the big plays. They can make a man miss. We talked a lot about Nuss throwing the ball downfield, and that was lacking in his game against Arkansas. But those talented receivers can make a guy miss, or Caden Durham can get loose in the open field, and it can be a big play touchdown really quickly. We saw that tonight with the big 70-yard touchdown. I think they had 5 or 6 plays for over 20 yards in the first half. So you can certainly see that, but the other side of that is they really, really struggle in tight spaces and in the red zone in particular. After they crossed the 50-yard line, even in the first half when they were having a lot of success, they had to settle for 4 field goal attempts. 3 of those were botched, right? Yeah. Either bad holds or a shanked kick or the snap miscommunication that we saw that will get me into infinity with the Jim face of the holder. But man, they have to find a way to be more successful in plus territory. They can get there and they can put up a lot of yards and a lot of chunk plays. But if they keep bringing field goals while the other team's scoring touchdowns, it's going to get them in trouble in some of these bigger games down the stretch. Their schedule even loosens up a little bit. I know they have Alabama next week, but that's going to be a massive, probably playoff elimination game. But yeah, I mean, that's the biggest red flag to me. Much is going to be made about LSU's mistakes tonight, by the way. A&M made just as many, if not more, mistakes in this game and still found a way to win between the penalties, the stupid personal fouls, the missed opportunities on offense in the first half. So I think it all kind of comes out in a wash, but that's just this thing that we've seen long-term for LSU that hasn't gone away.
Well, and I do want to talk about the mistakes for A&M here in just a second. You mentioned the special teams nightmares. That was a killer. I think also not being able to convert in the red zone goes back to not being able to run the ball. They were one-dimensional, and that works when the field is elongated, right? When you can spread the secondary out, but as soon as it compresses and you got to fight in a phone booth, LSU has really struggled with that all season long. There's no doubt that they have to get that cleaned up, as well as just the ability to win close games and stay focused in the second half. The noise for Kyle Field finally got to them. The environment, the pressure from that pass rush finally got to them. This is the Brian Kelly song and dance that we go through with LSU every single year. That's why he pounded the table against in the loss after the USC game, was because this team, and traditionally his teams, have a little bit of an issue closing down ball games. So
they played that clip at the perfect time in the broadcast too. It just added to the vibe so much. And you'll talk about the pass rush getting home, Mitch. LSU had allowed 2 sacks all season in this game prior to this game, and A&M got 2 tonight. So literally doubled their sack total on the year.
Yeah. Garrett, there's a question in the chat about A&M and Texas both getting into the playoff. I kind of want to we'll talk playoffs, and we can weave it in throughout this episode. But Trey, you mentioned the penalties, the mistakes from Texas A&M. As we kind of transition to what's in front of the Aggies here, it's 5-0 in the SEC for the first time ever. It is first place alone in the Southeastern Conference, and the most inside of all tracks to Atlanta to an SEC championship game. That being said, there's still 3 really tough games in front of you: at South Carolina, at Auburn, home against the University of Texas, in the biggest rivalry game, I think, this season, certainly given the stakes, right? Texas A&M found a way to win a game that was very losable. That is something that they have not done in years past. But the mistakes nearly cost them chances to do that. The personal foul penalties, the over-aggressive behavior from like Shamar Turner after the play is done, holding, offsides, false starts, you name it. Texas A&M made one of those penalties tonight. They had a targeting call, for goodness sakes,
on a wide receiver,
on just a good old fashioned block.
I just completely disagree with the call, but that's a whole separate thing.
That being said, Texas A&M has quite a bit to get cleaned up. And I'll say this, I think if there's one thing that's going to hold the Aggies back, it's going to be those penalties, because time and time again, we watch them make the same procedural penalties. And that may be the most frustrating part of this whole season.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with learning a new offense still. There's a lot more motion than they had in Jimbo Fisher's offense. So they got to figure that out. A lot of it's procedural, but 10 for 97, got to get that cleaned up. It does seem like a recurring problem that they have to do. And a lot of it is just over celebration, it feels like. How many times have they been called for something stupid after a big play this year?
Yep.
It's just overemphasizing the effort. Like, like we were talking about Armage just kind of being sloppy. And, I think Turner had the sloppy where he just kind of pushed the guy or whatever. It's like, it's just getting too into the moment. And I love the chip on the shoulder. I love that they want to play with energy. They want to play with passion. Like, that's something that you want out of, any team that you're playing, especially on the defensive side. You want guys that are going to come in there and hit guys and feel good about that. Like, again, Jade, even on the offensive side, like, he gets called for a blindside block where he's going in to seal a guy in the run game. He got a guy knocked on his butt, and he goes, okay, well, I guess that you hit him too hard, and that's a penalty or something. I'm okay with that from just an effort standpoint. I'd rather you do that than, like, go in there a little bit soft and then not make the play. Like, if the refs are going to make a call like that, the refs are going to make a call like that, but it's cleaning up the little extra push at the very end, or like right at the end of the play, they blow the whistle, and then you're like, nah, let me just finish this block a little extra aggressive. You can't do that. You just can't do that kind of thing. Well,
so let's go ahead and I'll give you guys the last word here. If there's anything else on Texas A&M LSU, now's the time, because I think this is actually a pretty good transition into Texas and Vanderbilt. I know they weren't one of our big 3, but I think there's a pretty natural transition the way that the chat is going right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say this is a scenario that I want to kind of paint for the Aggies. I want to give you a blind look at this game. Don't even think about the outcome. The opposing team threw for 400 yards and you completed 8 passes, and you won a football game, and you're 7-1 leading the SEC.
15 points.
By 15 points, you won this game. And you had 1 sack in this game. Like, if I told you those stats in a blind room, or Tuesday was the 1 sack late in the game, and whatever. But you finished with 2 sacks. You get, if I told you blindly, you have 2 sacks in this game, and they're going to throw for 400 yards, and you're only going to complete 8 passes, Aggies are going to be like, well, it was year 1, and, we're still building, and it's okay. Mike Elko, he's going to get the program right. You can't expect him, and the moment was too big and all that. And instead, you get to say, hey, look, we got lots of stuff to work on in College Station. You got to get the penalties cleaned up. You got to figure out the pass game a little bit. You got to get, certain receivers going and involved. You got to, find ways to start faster. You got to, especially on the defensive side, find ways to clamp down earlier. But you get to learn those things and work on those things being 7-1, 5-0 in conference and, vaulting towards a playoff spot.
Yeah, winning is a skill. Winning is a skill. It's a skill that the team has not had for the last decade, and it's really nice to see it return. Yeah, Trey.
I had one more thought. I'll save it for Monday. It's a good Monday show thought. So
okay,
tune in on Monday to the live show.
Yeah, there you go. 3-Tech Takeout. All right, so from College Station, let's go over to Nashville, where Texas beats Vanderbilt 27-24. It really felt like they survived this game. And I think I was texting with a buddy. Texas really got to find out how scrappy it is to win on the road in the SEC, right? I mean, everyone makes fun of, oh, well, you only beat this team by so many points. Was it on the road? If it was on the road, then let's just be happy you won, because really in the SEC, any given Saturday, you can lose a game on the road. And Vanderbilt is one of the better teams in the conference this year. I mean, they just are. They're not a traditional power, but my goodness, Diego Pavia and Jerry Kill have that magic working for Clark Lee's program. So talk to me about your biggest takeaway from this game. I think for me, Texas found a way to win despite 10 penalties for 107 yards. And it felt like every time Texas tried to put this game away, tried to make a big play that finally buried Vanderbilt, there was a yellow flag waiting on the field to bring that play back.
Yeah, and I think Sark called this a culture win after the game, and I totally agree with that. Their first ever road game in the SEC, and you beat a scrappy team that's given a lot of teams trouble. I tweeted out this stat a couple times this week. They were 3-1 outright as a double-digit underdog this year. So regardless of the spread, I think it was 17.5 when the game kicked off. You knew this was going to be a close game. You knew Diego Pavia was going to be a problem throughout this game. And I was really impressed with how Texas responded after a tough emotional game last week. And the start of the game going about as poorly as it possibly could for the Longhorns, with Quinn throwing a tipped interception on the first drive, Diego Pavia immediately just doing Diego Pavia things and running into the end zone, breaking contain, and when it looked like they had him bottled up. So really impressed with their ability to fight through that. You said it best, Mitch. On the road in the SEC, it's survive and advance. Doesn't matter if you win by 3, doesn't matter if you win by 30. Cherish the wins on the road, because all too often they end up the opposite side of this.
I think what also stood out to me was, Quinn Ewers throws 2 interceptions this game. Both of them were
at the line of scrimmage.
Tipped at the line of scrimmage, exactly. Quinn goes 27 of 37 for 288 yards. I made a comment under a Texas beat writer's post that Quinn had an excellent game, and immediately had Longhorn fans trashing me for saying that, like I didn't watch the game. I think he executed Sark's game plan today.
Did he complete 17 straight passes at one point?
Yes, he did. I mean, the issue was not Quinn Ewers. He throws for 288 yards in this game. Were they downfield bombs? No. But Sark's game plan isn't always just taking the top off the defense. For me, the issue was that Texas at times had a little bit of a trouble running the football. They end up with 104 yards. Trey Wisner goes 17 for 79, 4.6 a carry. Jaden Blue also ran for 4.7. But at times, Vanderbilt found ways to get them off the field. Did I think that Quinn had a perfect game? No. But the bounce back that he needed after the Georgia game, where they got punched in the mouth early and often, I thought was as solid of a bounce back as one could reasonably expect on the road against a ranked Vanderbilt team where you don't know which direction their next offensive play is going.
Well, and you have to take that into account, right? You have to take the big picture into account with this game. You're a Texas team who just lost a heartbreaker to Georgia, right? You have all the hype in the world going into that game, and then you have to go on the road to a team that's playing surprisingly well for the year. Not a lot of people probably circled this Vanderbilt game as a tough one for Texas going into the season, but Diego Pavia has been playing really good football, and you found a way. That's what you have to give them credit for. They found a way. They didn't play their best game. Sometimes weird stuff like that happens in the SEC, where you throw 2 picks that get tipped at the line and things just get weird, right? And when things get weird in the SEC, You have to find a way to win. The better team has to find a way to make that one or two more plays and just find their way out of it. Did they play perfect? Absolutely not, right? They didn't play a perfect football game. Was Quinn perfect? No, he played well, but he wasn't perfect. He didn't have a perfect game. But that's not what you need when you go on the road in the SEC. You just got to find a way to win. Diego Pavia doesn't play his best game. Only completes 16 for 29 for 143. Throws 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Like, this was not his best game. He runs for another 67, but overall you contained him, right? You contained the guy who is their big-time playmaker. You hold him to 114 rushing. That's not a recipe for success if you're Vanderbilt. You want to run the ball better than that. And, this is not, last year's or the years before that or, the decade before that Vanderbilt or whatever it's been. This is a good Vanderbilt team that is not getting enough credit for what they're doing. I know that people are kind of like, ooh, this is kind of fun. Vanderbilt's winning football games. This is a good Vanderbilt team, and you found a way to win at Vanderbilt after a massive letdown spot. You should be thankful about this. This ain't the Big 12. You don't just go on and win every game by 30 or 40 points because you show up, right? They're in the SEC now. They went to a tough spot, and they found a way to win. Take your couple points and move on, right? Move on, go to the next week, get better, keep adjusting, and you'll be fine.
Defense looked good for the Horns as well. They held Vandy to 3 of 12 on third down, just 269 total yards, 2 key interceptions that Diego Pavia threw, who I believe he only had 1 interception all season long coming into this game. So they got him to turn the ball over. And even though the final score is a 3-point game, I felt like Texas had Vandy at arm's length for the majority of this game. They gave up the initial score. They came back. At times, it felt like they were on the verge of busting it open. And like I said, some penalties kind of ended drives. The 2 interceptions obviously helped Vandy keep it close as well. But, Garrett, if you'll pull up that question from the chat now, from here, every fan, I think, of college football in the world at some point is now looking towards November 30th. Texas going to College Station to take on the Aggies. Is there a scenario where we get both A&M and Texas in the playoff, as Andrew asks in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely there is. It gets a little tricky because the Aggies have lost a non-conference game. Mm-hmm. So I just want to paint this like doomsday scenario for A&M, I guess, because I think you have to we're assuming that both teams take care of business through Thanksgiving up to the game in College Station. If we're talking playoff scenarios, we talk about that. Obviously, there's tricky games for both teams, opportunities to stub your toe. But if A&M and Texas are both 10-1 going into College Station, I think the winner of that game plays their way in. The only way the loser of that game is out is I think if A&M loses that game and is still in the SEC championship and then loses the SEC championship. Mm-hmm. It would then get tricky if A&M sitting at 10-3 with losses and 2 straight losses to end the year. But that's just like playing way too many games in my head for right now. So we'll just stick and say 10-2 is the good barometer. It could get tricky with a loss in the SEC championship, but I think they'd be okay.
Yeah, it's going to take 3 losses to keep one of them out of it. I don't think 10-2 or 11-2 for either of them. Even if that 11-2 is, either of them losing the SEC championship game, I don't think 2 losses keeps either of these teams out.
Mm-hmm. It won't be an elimination game either way, though. I think unless both stub their toe or one stubs their toe, right? Like if A&M loses to South Carolina or Texas loses to Arkansas or something like that, and it's 9-2, then it's a play your way in game and avoid getting eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. It's also interesting because this is obviously the first year of the expanded playoff. The committees are not supposed to use past years as kind of jurisprudence, but we have mixed results on losses in SEC or in conference championship games, right? Notre Dame in 2020 gets blitzed the year that they played in the ACC. They stay in the playoff as the 4 seed. Georgia loses last year in a competitive game, but they do lose the SEC championship game after going undefeated all throughout the year. They're clearly one of the top 4 teams, and yet they get booted to the Orange Bowl. So very inconsistent how committees have looked at championship games as a decider of whether you get in or not. Hypothetically, could be a little bit easier to include a loser of a conference championship game now that there are 12 slots, but we'll just have to wait and see. The Texas schedule for the remainder of the season, by the way, they're off this next week. They'll host Florida, go to Arkansas, which suddenly looks a little bit more daunting after Arkansas hung a 50 burger on Mississippi State. They'll host hapless Kentucky, and then they go to Texas A&M. So quite a bit to pay attention to here in the Lone Star State. We're really excited for it. Hopefully you guys are as well. Quickly around the rest of the SEC, and then we'll talk big fish in the Big Ten. Alabama destroys Missouri 34-0. This game goes, I think, as according to plan as most people predicted. Trey, I know you took Missouri plus the points. Brady Cook does end up starting this game, but very quickly he injures his hand. It's the Drew Pine experience. And, oh, would you look at that? He starts throwing the ball to the wrong team. Missouri just had no juice offensively. Nate Noel was out as well. And Alabama took care of business at home. My question for you, though, and we'll move on, did you feel like this was a neck crack game for Alabama, or do you still have some hesitancy after watching the Tide today?
I think they ran the ball extremely well. They had 271 yards on the ground. That was really impressive. Milroe did what he had to do. It was just very businesslike. And I think if you're an Alabama fan, you'll take that at this point. It was a slower start. It seemed like they were stuck on 6-0 and 13-0 forever. But then the points started to pour in. I'll 100% take this if I'm an Alabama fan, setting up a big showdown with LSU next week.
Absolutely. That game is going to be must-see TV next weekend. Elsewhere, Ole Miss, they hang on. They hand Oklahoma their third straight double-digit loss of the season. Now, this is interesting for two reasons. Number one, it keeps Ole Miss alive in the college football playoff race. Number two, though, it means that Oklahoma has suffered its worst stretch of defeats since 1998. The Sooners are now 1-4 in SEC play, and it's the first time that they've lost 3 straight games by double digits since the late 90s. Jackson Arnold was in at quarterback today for the Sooners. He looked decent in the first half. I even tweeted at one point that I really felt like he was kind of the dog driving this Oklahoma offense. But at the end of the day, the offensive line injuries, the wide receivers being out, Oklahoma just kind of looks like a dead and deflated program right now. And I don't know where they're going from here. At times, Brent Venables looks, out over his skis. He just looks like the game's moving a little bit too fast for him. That offensive line, guys, absolutely abysmal. 9 sacks given up, 15 tackles for loss given up. I believe Oklahoma statistically has the worst offensive line in the country as far as pressure, hits, sacks now given up.
Look, they're in over their heads because they're playing one of the hardest SEC schedules you could possibly play. We saw this coming. We knew that this was going to happen. We saw this coming from the offseason. We made videos about it.
And not the injuries. We didn't see the injuries coming, obviously.
But we didn't. You couldn't possibly imagine the injuries would be as bad as they were. But we did also. I told people in the offseason that 6-6 was a possibility with this schedule. And 6-6 is a possibility with the schedule. At this point, if you're a Sooner fan, you might be begging for 6-6 because you want to keep a bowl streak alive or something. But I don't know. I'm not overly impressed so far this year, but this is still a great program. They're going to figure it out at some point. They're going to get not as bad of a schedule at some point. That point probably isn't this year. And, I'm kind of done dunking on the Oklahoma fans. They're, pretty crazy in our comment section. I'm not going to dunk on you anymore. You've finally figured out what it's like when you play a crazy SEC schedule. Sometimes dims to breaks, right? Sometimes that happens. And the SEC office gives you a brutal schedule, and then you just look to the office and go, what the heck is that all about? It happens. That's the SEC.
Well, and what's worse is you have Maine this next week, and then your last 3 games are at Missouri versus Alabama, at LSU. That's a brutal schedule. On top of
3
that,
teams that are going to be playing for their playoff lives at that point. I guess one of LSU or Alabama will probably be out at that point, but
yeah,
the other 2 will be playing for their lives and trying to make a statement against you.
What's even worse, though, is with Seth Luttrell being fired at Oklahoma, Joe John Finley is now taken over as the offensive coordinator. Guys, Jackson Arnold is still a legit possibility to transfer out. The way that he's been treated this season, and I'm not going to speculate on that. I hate it when recruiting services write articles about, hey, these 5 guys need to get in the portal. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying what has been discussed and what rumors are is that Jackson Arnold is unhappy, right? And it makes sense. The way that he's been treated, he said he didn't want to play meaningless snaps, but if I could help Oklahoma win, he told Coach Venables, put me in. So maybe they make up, maybe they make nice, and Jackson Arnold's the quarterback next year. But boy, the Sooners offensively are in a bit of a bother right now going forward, to put it mildly. All right, let's go to the Big Ten, where we teased off the top. Ohio State, Penn State absolutely survive. And I don't have the final of the Penn State Wisconsin game.
28-13.
Drew Aller, the big story in this one, goes out with a right knee injury. He was sacked on a play, I believe, in the second quarter. Came up kind of lame. Tried to give it a go coming out of the tunnel at half, and just immediately knew it's not going to work. So Penn State plays their backup, who impressively pulls off the comeback. They're down at the half to Wisconsin. They end up pulling away. A very quality win up in Camp Randall when Garrett, we were putting the upset alert on Penn State, specifically because of the way that Wisconsin could run the ball.
Yeah, and winning on the road, that's always tough, right? Winning on the road at a place like Wisconsin where, they're absolutely nuts and the fans are awesome. That's obviously going to be difficult. But yeah, they did what they needed to do. They were the better team. That's not, anything that I think anyone can debate here. But, Katron Allen with a pretty good day running the football. That definitely helped them kind of get back into that game. And I saw he had a touchdown in that as well. So it's end of the day, better teams are supposed to win. You found a way to win. For me, the biggest story is just going to be what's up with Drew Aller. What can he do for the rest of the season? You want to survive in advance. They found a way to survive in advance, but they're not going to do what they want to do if Drew Aller is not healthy and ready to go.
It looked like he was walking around under his own power quite a bit, just probably a little precautionary. And obviously with Ohio State next week, you want to be as careful as you possibly can be. Looks like we had a little bit of look ahead. Speaking of Ohio State, if we can transition to that one, both teams coming out a little flat. Wisconsin had a hot start in this game. Obviously, Nebraska was right there with a chance to beat Ohio State in Columbus today. Definitely got a lot of look ahead vibes with both of those programs facing off next week.
Well, and I think the biggest issue for me with Ohio State, they win 21-17 over Nebraska. That was very much in doubt late. Dylan Raiola throws a terrible interception to seal that game for the Buckeyes. Overall, I think it's just the inconsistency that we've seen from the Buckeyes. And this isn't the first time this season that we've seen it, which is really what's signaling alarm bells for me. I put this out in a conversation on Twitter. At times, it feels like, yes, this is the team that can and should win the national championship. At other times, it feels like, oh my gosh, this team might get run by Michigan in the big game at the end of the season. There are just entire lapses where pick your unit and they're not operating at full capacity. It was the offensive line today, mostly. The defensive line gave up some gashing runs that really felt like, okay, Nebraska's getting ahead of steam. The offensive line gets worked. They give up 2 sacks and 7 tackles for loss, which doesn't look egregious, but when you watch the game, Will Howard is running for his life. Chip Kelly's having to scheme around a left tackle that was like cheesecloth. I mean, he was just giving up pressure left and right. And it really affected the ability for Ohio State at times to move the ball down the field. It looked like they were having to go left and right instead of north and south.
Well, and another point to that, Mitch, they run the ball 31 times for 64 yards. That is 2.1 per carry. That's not going to get it done. You can't get it. And that's with 2 stud running backs, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson. That's 2 stud running backs that should be able to get it done. Part of that's probably on them, right? They got to find ways to read blocks, make something happen. But if your offensive line is getting worked like that, there's only so much you can do at a certain point. And so, they got to be better up front, and you shouldn't have those kinds of concerns against. I mean, I know Nebraska, that's kind of their game plan was to try to just get after him, right? And just find a way to make stuff, go crazy in the backfield. But you can't get beat like that or up front. You can't get beat like that and expect to win a lot more games. I don't care who you're playing, right? Nebraska, we don't necessarily respect them as a team right now. But we don't respect Michigan. We don't respect, a lot of these teams down the stretch on the schedule. They could lose a couple games if they don't get that stuff figured out up front.
It's so weird because Howard was super efficient in this game and looked accurate, 13 to 16, obviously did have the interception, but looked like the game plan was just kind of like they were sleepwalking through this one. They didn't expect Nebraska to live in their backfield. Mm-hmm. And I think Jeremiah Smith had 1 target in the first half. Now it went for a bomb touchdown, but you want to get that guy involved, maybe a little bit more than just 1 target.
Well, I think that what was lacking was any sort of rhythm, any sort of flow for the Ohio State offense. Guys, they went 1 of 10 on 3rd down conversions in this game and just 1 of 2 on 4th down conversions. So if Nebraska got them behind the chains, their defense was getting off the field. And I do want to give some snaps to Nebraska's defense because they really, I thought, played a very complete game. They gave their offense every chance to be able to win this. Unfortunately for the Huskers, Dylan Raiola still cannot complete a deep ball to save his life. Similarly to that post that he had wide open against Illinois, where if he completes that, they win that game. He had 2 or 3 deep throws in this game that if he's able to complete that, drop the ball in the bucket, I think we might be talking about Nebraska going on the road and scoring an upset victory. I mean, it really felt like it was as simple as that.
There's the goal line stand too. Weren't they stopped on the 1 yard line?
Yep. Ohio State stopped Nebraska. Yeah. So yeah, the Huskers had their opportunities. There's no doubt about it. Last note for me, Emeka Buka, 31 straight games with a catch. That's an incredible feat to complete in a career, especially when I know he's a 5-star coming in, but it's felt like he's always been kind of the bridesmaid, right, of the wide receiver group. There's always been somebody there that's gotten the headlines ahead of him. He's finally gotten his time to shine, and I know he's sharing that wide receiver core with Jeremiah Smith, but Buka is doing an absolute great job for Ohio State this season. Speaking of teams doing great jobs in the Big Ten, we got to talk Indiana. 31-17 win over Washington. They are the first 8-0 team in Indiana history since 1967. They're also chasing their first 10-win season ever. Trey, what did you like from the Hoosiers today? It felt like they were the more physical team against Washington. And, there were times where this game was very close, but again, another effort for Indiana where they win by double digits and they felt in control.
Yeah, with their backup quarterback too. They're the only team that started 8-0 and not trailed in those 8 games since like the 90s, I think, according to ESPN stats and info. So yeah, I mean, doing it with your backup quarterback, Taven Jackson, had a solid game. It looked a little dicey coming out of the half. There was the turnover and Washington scored relatively quickly after that, but they settled down, regained control of the game, and it was all Indiana from that. Washington looked like they were moving the ball early, and then it stopped with a pick 6. So anytime Washington seemed like they were getting a little momentum, Indiana just sniffed that out.
Yeah, it was the Justice Ellison show. I love that dude. Fantastic. He finished with 29 carries. Wish he could have gotten that extra one. Just, finished with a nice round 30 because he was an absolute workhorse. Got it done. I think one of their corners had like 2 picks as well. And played a heck of a game. This is a really good football team. There's some teams, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later in the show. There's some teams that have been like, oh, that's a pretty cool story that team's playing well. But there's some teams that are starting to prove, hey, wait a minute, that team's actually pretty solid and might be something to actually worry about in terms of a run towards the end of the season. I think Indiana's on that list of teams. We got to start looking at it a little bit more seriously. Like, hey, could this be one of the better teams in the country? Do we need to start talking about them as a contender, not just to maybe make some noise, but, make the playoff, make a run in the playoff?
We're going to get to see. They take on Michigan State next week before Michigan. They're home versus the Wolverines. They go to Columbus, and then they'll host Purdue in the finale. So, we'll see. Last question on the Hoosiers. If I said 10.5 over under win total, which side are you taking?
I'll take the over. I think they steal one of Michigan or Ohio State. Okay. And honestly, I think 10-2 would be a disappointment for Indiana.
Is it stealing versus Michigan right now? Like, I'm not
Michigan
trying to be
mean. Better today.
They look better. I was getting ready to defend them here in a second if we were going their direction, but I still don't know that Michigan's the better team. Just put them on a neutral field against Indiana. I think we might power rate the Indiana Hoosiers a little bit higher than Michigan right now. I think they're just a little bit of a better team.
I think anytime Indiana beats Michigan in football, though, it's going to be considered an upset, unless it's like 10-0 versus 0-10.
An upset for the program, right? Yeah.
Yes.
History for the program.
But not for the team this year. It's a better team this year.
Sure.
Michigan does beat Michigan State in the battle for Paul Bunyan's axe, 24-17. Big fight broke out after that one. Colson Loveland throwing some fuel to the fire, saying little brother stays doing little brother things. That rivalry is just nasty. I mean, absolutely nasty. You talk about hate for one another. Michigan and Michigan State have that. Let's move on over to the Big 12, though. Trey, what stood out?
We're not going to give Oregon a shout out for just drubbing Illinois today.
I was going to give
35-3 at halftime.
They did absolutely.
That's your number one team in the
destroy
country, destroying a pretty good defense that we highlighted, I thought. So
Well, and Luke Altmaier was throwing the ball all over the lot. He threw some picks. Illinois was not particularly efficient moving the football. Yeah, the Ducks controlled that game from stem to stern. It was a full effort. I think Oregon continues to solidify themselves as the number one team in the country. So congratulations, Dan Lanning. He's doing yeoman's work up there in the Pacific Northwest. Trail, kick the Big 12 storylines to you. I had two of note. BYU staying unbeaten. Kansas State, they absolutely survive.
Yeah.
For Kansas in the Sunflower Showdown. Utah loses to Houston. Where do you want to go?
Let's talk Sunflower Showdown, because this almost just destroyed the entire Big 12.
It did.
Eliminating Kansas State likely from playoff contention, or at least needing a lot of help to get to the Big 12 championship game. Listen, it was a game that neither team really felt like they wanted to win for long points of the second half. I'll confess, I was mostly locked in on A&M OSU, but I was peeking at my phone every now and then, checking in on this one. Just between turnovers, dumb penalties, Jaden Daniels fumbling late in the game when Kansas is trying to run out the clock. But credit Kansas State for weathering that storm, finding a way in a rivalry game that Kansas honestly was probably treating like their championship game with all the struggles that they've had this year. They were throwing all the eggs in this basket to get a big win. And Kansas State survived. That's what conference championship caliber teams do when you don't bring your A game. You find a way to win. We saw it with Iowa State last week against UCF. We see it this week in the Sunflower Showdown. I think that's 16 or 17 straight in this one for Kansas State. So it's starting to feel a little bit like Trinity Bell from a few years ago, Garrett. You know a lot about that. Shout out to the kicker, Chris Tennant, 51-yard field goal career long at the gun. Or not at the gun, but with about a minute left to seal the deal there for Kansas State.
There's some long kicks in college football today.
College kickers are doing too well this year, LSU notwithstanding. But
yeah, so, I can't remember who. Someone had a 56-yarder earlier today. I apologize for misremembering who that was. Ball State walked off Northern Illinois in the battle for the stock with a 52-yarder, I believe. So yeah, just some absolute bombs. And then you had
Houston walked off Utah.
They did. Yeah. And then LSU just, they're all, I think everybody on the team.
It was the whole operation. It wasn't just the kicker.
No, every scholarship
player. It was
player,
kind of the kicker, but it wasn't only the kicker.
Yeah. They're going to be doing special teams work. Anything else? Baylor beats Oklahoma State.
I want to not gloss over BYU. That's what I want to do. I want to not just gloss over, BYU.
Dog BYU.
Going on the road and handling business. I guess I'll do my weekly check-in. Do we get apologies? Is BYU good yet? Or what are we going to say? LJ Martin had a fantastic game in that one. I think I'm going to have to check it again. 15 carries, 101 yards, and a touchdown. Average 6.7 on the ground. That'll get it done. Red Slap, another pretty good day at the office. 16 for 24, 228, 2 touchdowns. Not just short fields, not just fluky turnovers, not just a bad quarterback. Is BYU good, guys? Are we going to?
I'll reserve judgment till Monday morning when Parker Fleming tells me if BYU is good.
I think they beat UCF pretty handily. They were up 17-0 right out of the gate. They outrushed UCF 252 to 181.
It was 34-10 at the end of the third quarter too.
Yeah,
they eased off it a little bit, which is why it looks closer. But yeah, they eased off the gas.
They absolutely
They're playing get out of town ball.
Yeah. So 8-0 for BYU. Path to Arlington is looking more and more open by the day. That's for sure.
Seal that little first round bye.
Tech ripped my heart out as the upset pick, outright upset pick this week.
That was brutal. They had a big lead. Baron Morton goes down. I believe he might have broken his collarbone. Again, another quarterback injury for the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Trey, our boy, Will Hammond, steps in. And
Hutto's finest, maybe.
Initially went 9 for 9. And, I mean, everything was just moving like greased lightning. And then the offense hit a brick wall. And I don't think after that point, Hammond completed another pass. He fumbles it late. A terrible play call to call a quarterback run with a freshman quarterback when all you need to do is center the ball And you know, it's going to be a long.
We have Taj Brooks. Like, why are we not giving?
Yes, you have one of the best running backs in the country. Just give it to him and go student body.
He might break one. He might break a touchdown.
He might. Maybe it goes from a 48-yard field goal to a 40-yard field goal. You don't know, but that was, you know, Hammond's like $160 dripping wet. And shout out to our Hutto Hippo. Only hippo mascot in the entire country is the Hutto Hippo. We called his final playoff game, his final game as a high school student. So yeah, got to talk a lot of Will Hammond. So we were freezing our butts off in Duncanville, Texas. That's for sure. I mentioned Baylor wins. Congratulations to them. They're 4-5. Oklahoma State, my Big 12 champion, 0-5 in conference play. They've quit. West Virginia wins, and we talked about Houston knocking off Utah as well.
Utah's down bad, y'all.
Their offense is stinky. Colorado is currently running roughshod over Cincinnati. So talk about BYU having the inside track. I think Colorado has fully announced their candidacy for Big 12 championship game. Can't get around that. Their offense is playing well. And more impressively, the defense has found a way to step
Finally
up.
playing well, yeah.
Cincinnati
They're pretty buttersoft to get started on the year, and that loss to Nebraska has continued to be a head-scratcher the way both teams are looking now towards the end of the year.
It's just taken time for them to get on the tracks, but it does look like they've finally done that. Let's go to the ACC. Pitt drubs Syracuse on Thursday night, 41-13. Kyle McCord threw 5 interceptions in this game, and it was 3 pick sixes.
Yep.
Just a brutal showing. Pitt, though, another team that we've kind of doubted on this. We did end up picking Pitt to win this game, but thought it would be a whole lot closer. They punched Syracuse in the mouth early, never looked back. Good for Pat Narduzzi and the boys. I found out pregame he was 9-1 coming out of bye weeks in his career at Pitt, so you just kind of knew that Pitt was going to win at that point. But what a statement for Narduzzi and the boys. They're in the driver's seat to secure an ACC spot right now. If they keep winning, I just have to mention their schedule at SMU, which
big one next week.
Trey, our tickets sold for that game. We just kind of accidentally left them out, and they got snatched up really, really quickly. So
made a nice little profit on them at the very least. So
yeah,
they're set pretty high.
Really good seats. Yeah, a couple of people are gonna have nice seats too. Homecoming next week for SMU. They'll play Virginia. That looks very winnable. They host Clemson. They go to Louisville, and they go to Boston College. You could get Pitt to the end of the year with just one loss if you squint a little bit.
Whoever wins next week, I'm rooting for them to go undefeated. So the ACC has to solve a crisis of 3 undefeated teams that they created.
You have been on this block since we got rid of divisions, but man, this year might be a case study in why
I want as much chaos as possible so we get rid of this bullcrap of no divisions.
I mean, truly it might be the
divisionless bullcrap segment.
It really is. How are we going to pretend like we can evaluate teams when there's going to be 7 teams in the SEC that are all 10-2 and none of them play each other?
Yeah. Divisionless system might truly be an answer to a question that nobody was actually asking. We'll see by the end of this year. The postmortem is going to be fascinating.
And somehow the answer was wrong.
SMU survives in overtime. Guys, SMU turned the football over 6 times. 6 times. They didn't get a single turnover until the very end. You know, Duke eventually turns it over on downs. They don't get the touchdown in overtime, or the 2-point conversion, I guess. Yeah. But 28-27, they hang on. They survive on the road at Duke.
And Duke was lining up for like a 38-yard walk-off field goal that SMU blocked.
It got blocked, right? Yeah.
Just to get to overtime.
Yeah. So Malik Murphy kind of looked like him through the air a little bit, 295 yards, 3 tutters. Rashard Smith, 117 yards on the ground for SMU. The Ponies continue to run it well. Kevin Jennings, though, 3 interceptions. Really, really not amazing performance from the Ponies, but survive in advance. You get a win on the road. That's a big deal. Virginia Tech, we talked about this a little bit in the preview episode. They win 21-6. Georgia Tech played 2 quarterbacks in this game, neither of which were Haynes King. They did not run the ball very well. The Hokies didn't. They only ran for, go to my run sheet, they ran for 99 yards, but they gave up 260 yards. So while people continue to jump on Virginia Tech's bandwagon, I'm going to just kind of let people have fun with that. I think there's still a lot of cracks in the foundation that we're not addressing. Elsewhere, it was just blowouts across the ACC. We do have to mention Miami destroys Florida State. Garrett, that was your lock of the week in the Ledger, 36-14.
And they didn't even need the refs in that one.
Well, no, they didn't. Kind of a ho-hum ball game here for Cam Ward, 22-35, 208 yards on the ground. They got
Martinez looked good.
Yeah, they got whatever they wanted. 15 for 148 and 2 touchdowns for Damian Martinez. They run for 230 as a team. Nothing else really standing out to me.
North Carolina slammed Virginia.
My quest to get the Hoos to a bowl game seems to be screeching to a halt, because if you can't beat Virginia at home, their remaining schedule, their over-under win total was 4.5, so they're stuck in the under right now. They now play at Pitt, at Notre Dame, home against SMU, at Virginia Tech. There's a very real possibility that we're going 4-8 after starting.
Yeah, you could go Oprah right there and not have that's pretty rough. After
starting 4-3 too, which is just absolutely tragic. Trey, I think that's all the power conferences, is it not? Yeah, we've gotten
all
through
4 of them.
We've gotten through all 4 of them. I have to give a shout out to the MAC. I don't know if you want to talk American football here in just a second, but shout out to the MAC for being endlessly entertaining today. Akron got their second win of the year against Eastern Michigan. The factory's been producing some decent football this year, and Akron said, no, sir, you don't. We're not letting you get bowl eligible just quite yet. Ball State, I mentioned, walks off Northern Illinois in the battle for the stock. Bowling Green kind of runs away from Toledo late in the Glass Bowl, 41-26, and then Western Michigan destroys Kent State, 52-21. So in the MAC standings, as we are just 10 days away from beautiful MACtion getting started on election night, we currently have the Western Michigan Broncos at 5-3, but 4-0 in conference. You then have a logjam with Miami of Ohio, and Bowling Green all at 3-1. Guys, may I remind you, we left Ohio for dead after they lost like 8 starters to the transfer portal post-spring ball. I mean, the Bobcats are doing tremendous work. Tim Albin might be a miracle worker.
Yeah, the bounce back has been great for them. It's been a lot of fun, and this is why you don't overlook G5 football, right? If you're overlooking G5 football, you're missing out on a lot of fun.
Yeah, Bowling Green continues to win in conference. They're 4-4 after the non-conference slate that just did not go their way. But there's
also Bowling Green Twitter kind of winning with their Toledo rebuttal. That was kind of fun.
Yeah,
the rocket failure to launch thing. That was kind of a fun.
They had some fun at their rivals' expense, no doubt. I think all the way down even to Ball State is a team alive, and then a team like Northern Illinois that beats Notre Dame feels like, man, they might be putting it all together. They're 1-3 in conference play. So the MAC is wide open. Over to the American, Trey, we do have to talk Navy. We obviously took them out of the Big Three because that game just was not beholden to that. But the midshipmen do get run over by Notre Dame. So in your mind, Navy's in all likelihood eliminated from playoff contention realistically. Mathematically, they're still going to be in. But it feels like Army is the Americans' last hope at just some tremendous story of making it to the playoffs.
Army's obviously the only team that doesn't need any help, because I think it'd be hard to ignore an undefeated Army team, especially if they knocked off Notre Dame. But I think Navy, Army, Tulane, and Memphis are all still alive for playoff contention, because Memphis's one loss to Navy is obviously aged okay. Tulane's only losses are to power conference teams. They got it done in Denton today in front of like tens of people.
I know.
But
there are dozens of us.
Gosh, that shot at the opening kickoff was depressing for the Mean Green. I think they're mathematically still alive. I wouldn't eliminate any of the top 4 from the American just yet. Obviously, everybody but Army will still need a little help, though. They'll need Boise State to get upset and maybe lose to UNLV in the championship game to kind of get a split decision in the Mountain West.
Memphis holds on against Charlotte. There was a
very much in doubt.
Very realistic possibility that Biff Poggi ended Memphis's season for all intents and purposes. But Seth Hennigan throws the go-ahead touchdown pass, I think with like 21 seconds left. It was late. Rock Taylor had to go up and make a really sick catch in the corner of the end zone. I mean, Memphis skated by a little bit on the skin of their teeth. Over to the Sun Belt. This is
Wait,
really
we got to talk Tulsa real quick. If you
that's
if I
true.
may.
Yes,
That was
please,
crazy.
please take it away. I may be a guest on a UTSA podcast on Monday. I don't know if they're going to be at the wake for the football
That one might
program
get
that night.
canceled.
Yeah, I need to check in with Meet Nation.
Yeah,
and see
show
if
up wearing black just to be respectful.
Yeah. So UTSA struggling this year. They were 3-4 coming into this one. Looked like they had righted some things. It was 35-7 at halftime. They were winning. And then they got up to 42-17 with 5.5 to go in the third quarter. Guys, they lost that game 46-45. Just insanity down the stretch. Forgot how to play defense. Insane comeback. Jeff Traylor had his someone at the Rose Bowl moment.
That's terrible.
Aren't you guys glad we had Mike Elko?
Yes.
Every day I get down on my
understandably.
knees and I say, thank you, God, that we didn't hire Jeff Traylor.
There was a strong Jeff Traylor contingent.
Mark
There were many in the media saying that we were fools for not hiring a guy with a ton of Texas connections.
Would y'all like
UTSA rolling?
Would y'all like the full drive chart here,
Please.
or just
Do it.
from 42-17?
Start from 42-17.
Okay, so from 42-17, 7-play 75-yard drive for UTSA in 2.5 minutes. That's when you go up 42-17. You're feeling great. You're feeling electric, right? That's to end the third quarter. Vibes are high. Tulane scores in 2 plays. Then you go punt, touchdown, not Tulane, Tulsa.
Yeah.
Touchdown Tulsa, punt UTSA, touchdown Tulsa, 8 plays. Punt, field goal UTSA, touchdown, 10-play, 75-yard drive in not even 3 minutes. I mean, Tulsa's moving at this point. UTSA needs an answer. It's 45-32 at this point. UTSA goes 3 and out in 24 seconds. Tulsa touchdown 45-39. Downs for UTSA on 5 plays, and then a touchdown, or I guess, downs,
ESPN's drive charts are so screwed up this year.
This is not good. It doesn't show how Tulsa got that last touchdown. It says downs for UTSA 45-46 Tulsa.
Yeah, their game trackers are weird. They don't always add the points when they're supposed to. I will say at 42-17, the win probability was 99.6 for UTSA.
And that's almost 100%.
That is brutal.
It peaked at 99.7 at halftime. It was 99.7.
99.7.
Golly, that's disgusting. All right, let's bring it home with the Sun Belt. Anything interests you guys here? ULM got absolutely boat raced by South Alabama
for ULM and their conference title chances. Got humbled quite a bit on the road. I was a little surprised that they were 7.5-point underdogs in this game, but Vegas knew what they were talking about. And Georgia Southern Thursday night got waxed by Old Dominion on the road. So this whole conference race outside of Louisiana is just completely on its head right now.
Well, so right now in the East, Old Dominion, the Monarchs, are your leader in the clubhouse. They're 4-4 in the season, but 3-1 in conference. They hold the tiebreaker over Georgia Southern, who's 5-3 and 3-1. Marshall, out of nowhere, is alive. They're 4-3 in the season, but 2-1 in conference. James Madison has 2 conference losses. Coastal's not very good. App State stinks, and Georgia State is really, really bad. On the other side, though, it's Louisiana, Arkansas State, South Alabama, and ULM that are all kind of the front runners. Texas State is technically alive. They had a bye this week, so they're 2-1. But the other 2 teams on that side are Southern Miss and Troy. They're both 1-7 and 0-4 in conference. So the Sun Belt's also a toss-up.
Yeah, it's one of the most competitive leagues in all of college football, and there's a lot of parity there. Anybody can get got any week, and we've seen a lot of that this year. I was a fool for saying James Madison was going to just run roughshod. Do that.
Well, hey, listen, it happens to the best of us.
Let's give Boise UNLV a shout out.
Yeah, we're gonna shout out that excellent game that just happened. That was fun. I don't know if y'all stayed up to watch that one. That one did kick at about 2:00 the next day, but that game was fun to stay up and watch. I had a great time at least.
Yeah, Ashton Jonty continues, I think, to have his Heisman moment. someone tweeted, was it Brett McMurphy? Yeah, Brett McMurphy tweeted like something to the effect of, oh, well, that's all that you need to know about Ashton Genty's Heisman campaign. He struggled to get over 100 yards, and then tweeted something about Barry Sanders. Only his worst game was 155 yards against Missouri.
We're not comparing it. Barry Sanders is not up for the 2024 Heisman.
Exactly.
But the fact that he's in the conversation with one of the greatest running backs of all time and the best running back season of all time should tell you his greatness. And to be fair, like, he struggled in this game by his standards. I wouldn't say, like, obviously he didn't struggle, but UNLV did a really good job getting after him. And there are several like tackles in the backfield where they just kind of stuffed the run. And even still, he ends up with 128 rushing, and that's pretty good day at the office.
And the game-winning touchdown.
Yeah, and the game-winning touchdown. It was just kind of a gutsy win for Boise. I found there were several times they just kind of had to find a way to make a play through the air because they were just deciding, no, we're not going to give up anything on the ground. And Boise found a way to win. They hit a couple big plays over the top, and they hit a couple like down towards the sideline, and there were some big catches. And I just want to shout Boise on this one. Like, they're kind of in the driver's seat for, I think, the G5 spot. We've all kind of been talking about that, but they're playing good football. They're playing the best quality football right now. And this was the big test, right? It was, can you get past UNLV? If not, UNLV is going to be the driver in that race. And yeah, it's Boise State, and then it's the rest of the G5 for me.
I agree. I think Boise should be the favorite. I think they're playing great football. UNLV came out early. They had a lot of momentum. They had some big plays, and Boise just found a way to reel them back in, keep the ball on the ground, and suffocate the air out of that stadium. I thought they did a great job in that. All right. Well, let's wrap our show at that point. Guys, what a week 9. I thought this was going to have a very different tenor to the show. Obviously, we spent a good deal of time talking Texas A&M LSU. We'd love to have you for a Week 10 preview, our 3-Tech Takeout on Monday night. Trey will be leading that, and we're just really excited as the playoff race heats up. Conference races start to heat up. You're really starting to separate the wheat from the chaff, and it's fun to have these conference battles starting to tighten up. We're going to be talking ball with you at every single juncture the rest of the season. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you like the stream, the podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your content. We'd love to have you as a part of the Jimmies and the Joes. For Trey Reeves and Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks for hanging out with us. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious, how about that?